The restaurant went silent the moment the red wine hit my face. It dripped down my navy dress onto the pearls my late husband once gave me, while my daughter-in-law Vanessa smirked and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Now you finally look as cheap as you are." A few people gasped. Someone dropped a fork. But the worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was my son Ryan sitting there, saying nothing. I looked at him, waiting for him to stand up for me the way he used to when he was little. He couldn't even meet my eyes. And that's when I realized something terrifying. The dinner wasn't really for my birthday, it was a setup. What none of them knew was that I had already discovered their plan before dessert was even served. If you've ever been hurt by someone you sacrificed everything for, I'd love for you to tell me where you're watching from tonight. And honestly, what would you have done if your own family humiliated you in public like this? Don't forget to like and subscribe if stories like mine touch your heart. Your kindness means more than you know. I used to believe love was measured by sacrifice. Not flowers, not expensive dinners, not grand speeches people posted online for strangers to admire. Real love, the kind I knew, was staying awake for 36 hours straight in a hospital chair while your child struggled to breathe from pneumonia. It was skipping meals so your son could afford soccer cleats. It was working Christmas nights so he could wake up to gifts under the tree and never realize the electricity had almost been shut off 2 days earlier. That was the kind of love I gave Ryan Cox, and for a very long time I truly believed he knew it. I was only 26 when my husband Harold died. One minute, he was standing in our tiny kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, still wearing his fire department jacket, laughing because he'd burned the toast again. The next minute, he collapsed onto the floor, clutching his chest while 11-year-old Ryan screamed for me to call 911. I can still hear that scream sometimes. People talk about widowhood like it arrives all at once, but it doesn't. It arrives slowly, in empty closets, in cold bed sheets, in silence at dinner tables, and in the terrified eyes of a little boy asking if everything was going to be okay when you honestly don't know the answer yourself. I became both mother and father overnight. During the day, I worked at Riverside Methodist Hospital as a nurse. At night, I picked up extra shifts whenever I could. There were months I barely slept. My feet constantly ached. My hands cracked from sanitizer and winter air. I learned how to smile even when I was exhausted enough to cry. But Ryan never went without. That mattered to me. I still remember one winter when he was 14. His school announced a trip to Washington, D.C. Every kid in his class was going except him because I simply couldn't afford it. He tried to pretend he didn't care. "It's okay, Mom," he told me while staring at the floor. I didn't even want to go. But later that night I heard him crying in his room, so I sold Harold's old fishing boat, the same boat my husband loved more than anything besides us. I sold it quietly and used the money for Ryan's trip. When Ryan found out years later, he cried harder than I did. "You gave up Dad's boat for me?" he asked. I smiled and touched his face. "You were always worth more." Back then, Ryan adored me. He'd bring me coffee after my night shifts. He'd rub my shoulders when arthritis started bothering my hands in my late 50s. When he graduated from Ohio State with his MBA, he hugged me so tightly outside the stadium I could barely breathe. "You did this, Mom," he whispered into my hair. "Everything I am is because of you." That sentence carried me through years of loneliness, because loneliness becomes familiar after a while, especially for women my age. Friends move away, some pass on, children grow up, neighborhoods change, the world starts moving faster than you do, but Ryan remained my center. Even after he started climbing the ladder in commercial real estate, he still called me every Sunday morning. At least in the beginning, I lived simply, always had. My little brick house in Columbus wasn't fancy, but it was warm. Clean curtains, a garden full of hydrangeas, old jazz records Harold used to love. I drove a 12-year-old Toyota Camry because it still worked perfectly fine. I bought clothes from department store sales. And unlike many people nowadays, I never felt ashamed of that. There's freedom in not needing to impress strangers. What Ryan never fully understood was that simple didn't mean poor. After Harold died, I became careful with money. Careful in the way widows often become when they realize nobody is coming to save them. I invested quietly over the years. Nothing flashy. Mutual funds, certificates. A trust Harold's father had helped establish long ago. I never discussed numbers because I was raised believing money should provide security, not status. And besides, I wanted Ryan to build his own life without expecting mine. Still, I helped him whenever he truly needed it. When he wanted to attend graduate school, I paid part of the tuition anonymously through Benjamin Turner, our longtime family attorney. Ryan thought it came from an educational grant. I never corrected him. When he found the perfect townhouse downtown, but lacked enough for the down payment, I loaned him the money. He promised to repay me. He never did. And I never asked. That's what mothers do sometimes. We call sacrifice love until one day we realize we've taught people to take without guilt. But none of that mattered to me back then. Because I loved seeing Ryan happy, and for a while he truly was. Then he met Vanessa Reed, the first time I saw her. She walked into an Italian restaurant wearing cream-colored heels that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She was beautiful. Not warm beautiful, sharp beautiful. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, perfect posture. The kind of woman who entered rooms expecting attention and usually receiving it. But she smiled sweetly when Ryan introduced us. "Mrs. Cox," she said, kissing my cheek lightly. "Ryan talks about you all the time." I remember feeling relieved. After years of hearing horror stories about difficult daughters-in-law, I thought maybe God had finally given us something easy. I was wrong. At first, the changes were subtle. Ryan started canceling Sunday breakfasts, then phone calls became shorter, then delayed, then forgotten entirely. Vanessa always had a reason. "We're just so busy. You know how demanding Ryan's work is? We've been networking constantly." Networking? That word became an invisible wall around my son. Months later, during dinner at their townhouse, I noticed Vanessa studying my purse. It was old leather, worn around the edges. Harold had bought it for me before Ryan was born. Vanessa smiled strangely. "You know," she said, casually sipping wine, "you'd look younger if you updated your style a little." Ryan laughed awkwardly. "Vanessa?" "No, I'm serious," she continued. "Presentation matters nowadays." I laughed softly to keep things pleasant, but something cold moved quietly through my chest. Because it wasn't concern in her voice, it was embarrassment. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if my own son had started feeling embarrassed by me too. I ignored the feeling then. I wish I hadn't. Because looking back now, I can see the truth clearly. The humiliation at my birthday dinner didn't begin with that glass of wine. It began years earlier. The moment Ryan stopped seeing me as the woman who raised him and started seeing me through Vanessa's eyes instead. At first, I blamed myself for the distance growing between Ryan and me. That's what mothers do. We search for flaws inside ourselves before we dare believe the people we love might actually be changing. Maybe I called too often. Maybe I gave too much advice. Maybe I was becoming one of those older women who couldn't let go of their children. So I tried harder to stay out of the way. I stopped dropping by unexpectedly. I apologized when I hadn't done anything wrong. I even started rehearsing conversations before calling Ryan, terrified of sounding needy, but none of it changed anything. Because the problem wasn't me. The problem was that Vanessa Reed Cox viewed kindness as weakness, and slowly she was teaching my son to see it the same way. About 6 months after their wedding, Vanessa invited me to brunch at a trendy cafe downtown. The kind of place with gold utensils, tiny portions, and drinks that cost $12 but somehow arrived without enough coffee in them. She wore oversized sunglasses even indoors. When I arrived, she hugged me lightly without standing up. "Autumn, thank God," she sighed dramatically. "I've had the worst morning." I smiled politely and sat across from her. "What happened?" She rolled her eyes. "One of my partnerships fell through because my audience says my content isn't aspirational enough lately." I nodded, even though I barely understood what that meant. Vanessa made money posting videos online. Expensive skincare, luxury vacations, white kitchens with flowers nobody touched. Everything looked beautiful. Everything looked fake. Ryan once tried explaining influencer culture to me, but honestly, it just sounded exhausting. Vanessa leaned forward suddenly. "Actually," she said carefully, "there's something I wanted to ask you." There it was. I'd started recognizing that tone, the overly sweet voice she used right before crossing boundaries. "What is it?" I asked gently. "Well," she stirred her drink slowly. "Ryan mentioned you've always been good with money." I smiled faintly. "I've been careful, yes." "That's amazing," she said. "Most people your age don't really prepare." Something about the phrase "your age" tightened my chest. Then she asked it casually, almost lazily. "So what do you actually have saved?" I blinked. "I'm sorry." You know, she laughed. "Retirement accounts, investments, life insurance, stuff like that." I stared at her for a second. In my generation, people simply didn't ask those questions. Not unless they had a reason. I gave a polite smile. "Oh, enough to live comfortably." But Vanessa didn't let it go. Comfortably means different things to different people. She laughed again like this entire conversation was harmless. Then she lowered her voice. "I'm only asking because eventually Ryan and I may need to help take care of you." There it was again. That strange assumption. As though my future already belonged to them. I folded my napkin carefully into my lap. That's thoughtful, I replied softly. But I managed just fine. Vanessa's smile tightened for the first time. The subject changed after that, but something inside me stayed unsettled long after brunch ended. And from that moment on, I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Little comments, little looks, little humiliations dressed up as jokes. One evening, Ryan and Vanessa hosted a dinner party at their townhouse for some of her friends. Everyone looked polished and expensive. Women with smooth foreheads and white teeth discussing investment properties and destination weddings. I brought a homemade peach cobbler. Vanessa glanced at it and forced a smile. "Oh," she said. "That's cute. Cute." Like I was a child bringing finger paintings to an art gallery. Later that night, I overheard one of her friends whispering in the kitchen. "Wait, his mom still shops at department stores." Vanessa laughed quietly. She refuses to modernize anything. The women giggled. I stood in the hallway holding empty plates while heat crawled slowly up my neck. Ryan walked in seconds later. For one desperate moment, I thought maybe he'd heard them too. Maybe this would be the moment he defended me. Instead, he just kissed Vanessa on the cheek and asked if there was more wine. I drove home crying that night. Not loudly. Widows learn how to cry silently. The next morning, Ryan called. "Mom, Vanessa thinks you were upset last night." I gripped the phone tighter. She laughed at me. She didn't mean anything by it. She let her friends mock me. Ryan sighed heavily like I was the difficult one. "You're taking things too personally." That sentence stayed with me for days. Because deep down, I knew something terrifying. Ryan wasn't protecting me anymore. He was protecting her from me. After that, Vanessa became bolder. She criticized my curtains, my hairstyle, my furniture. Once she walked into my kitchen, looked around and said, with a few renovations, this place could almost feel current. Current. As if my home was outdated simply because it carried memories older than her Instagram account. Still, I kept trying. God help me, I kept trying. I invited them for Sunday dinners. I mailed birthday cards. I knitted Vanessa a cream-colored scarf one Christmas after she casually mentioned liking cashmere. 2 weeks later, I saw the exact scarf tossed carelessly across the backseat of her car underneath shopping bags. Unused, forgotten. Like me. But the moment that truly changed everything happened almost a year before my birthday dinner. Vanessa didn't know I was upstairs. Ryan and Vanessa had invited me over after church because Ryan wanted help organizing some old tax paperwork. He was downstairs printing documents while Vanessa spoke on speakerphone in the kitchen with her older sister Claire Reed. Claire was even crueler than Vanessa, the kind of woman who smiled while insulting people. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard my name. Claire laughed through the speaker. "So what's the plan with Ryan's mom, long term?" Vanessa groaned dramatically. "Honestly, I don't know. She's healthy now, but eventually we'll have to put her somewhere." The two women laughed. Put her somewhere. I froze on the staircase. Claire snorted. "Well, at least she probably doesn't have much money." Vanessa answered immediately. "That's the annoying part. I can't figure it out. She acts broke, but Ryan says she helped with his down payment years ago." Claire whistled. "You better figure that out before she leaves everything to a dog shelter or something." Vanessa laughed hard at that. Then she said the sentence that made my stomach turn cold. I swear if Ryan wasn't so soft about her, I'd already have her in some cute little retirement condo. I couldn't breathe for a second. Not because I feared retirement homes, but because of the contempt in her voice. I quietly walked back upstairs before they saw me, and for the first time in my entire life, I locked myself in a bathroom and stared into a mirror wondering when exactly I had become a burden to my own family. That night, Ryan hugged me goodbye at the front door. "Love you, Mom." I looked at my son's face, the same face I'd kissed when he was feverish, the same eyes Harold used to have, and I wondered something I never thought a mother should wonder. Did he know what his wife was becoming? Or worse, did he know and simply not care anymore? After overhearing Vanessa and Claire talking about putting me somewhere, I stopped sleeping well. Not because I believed they could force me into a nursing home overnight. I wasn't helpless. I still drove myself everywhere. I paid my own bills. I volunteered twice a month at church and baked peach pies that disappeared within minutes at every fundraiser. No, what haunted me was something much worse. The realization that people I loved were beginning to discuss my future as though I were already disappearing. As though my life had quietly become an inconvenience waiting to be managed. And the hardest part, Ryan never noticed how much I was hurting. Or maybe he noticed and chose silence because silence was easier than confronting his wife. I kept telling myself marriages were complicated. Women my age are taught to excuse bad behavior in the name of keeping families together. So I swallowed things I never should have swallowed. Little humiliations, tiny cuts that eventually became wounds. A month after that phone call incident, Vanessa invited me shopping with her and Claire. I almost said no, but part of me still desperately wanted to belong. The three of us walked through an upscale mall outside Columbus while Vanessa filmed little clips for social media. Girls' Day with family, she sang into her phone with a bright fake smile. Family. Interesting word considering how they treated me once the camera lowered. Claire strutted ahead, carrying designer bags, while Vanessa dragged me into a boutique filled with clothes so expensive I was afraid to touch anything. A young saleswoman approached us politely. Vanessa smiled and pointed toward me. "We're trying to help my mother-in-law update herself a little." The girl looked uncomfortable. I forced a smile. "Oh, I'm just browsing." Vanessa picked up a cream-colored blazer and held it against me. "No offense, Autumn, but you dress like someone waiting for bingo night?" Claire burst out laughing. I laughed too. That's the embarrassing part. I laughed because older women learn to laugh when people humiliate them. It makes everyone else more comfortable. But inside, I felt myself shrinking. Vanessa tilted her head critically. "You know what your problem is?" I stayed quiet. "You don't realize appearances matter." Claire nodded. "Especially nowadays." "Ryan's successful now. People judge." That sentence sat heavily between us. Ryan's successful now. Meaning, what exactly, that I no longer fit into the image they wanted beside him? I looked down at my sensible navy shoes and suddenly became painfully aware of everything about myself. My age, my wrinkles, my simple clothes, the soft skin on my hands that years of hospital sanitizer had roughened permanently. For the first time in my life, I felt poor standing next to people richer in vanity than character. Later, while Vanessa tried on sunglasses, Claire leaned toward me and lowered her voice. "You know Vanessa worries about Ryan carrying too much responsibility." I frowned slightly. Responsibility? Claire gave me a sympathetic look so fake it almost impressed me. Well, aging parents become a lot eventually. There it was again. Not concern. Burden. I smiled tightly. "I'm not dependent on Ryan." Claire shrugged. "Not yet." That word echoed in my head all the way home. Not yet. That evening I stood in front of my bathroom mirror longer than usual. I studied my reflection carefully. Silver hair, fine lines around my eyes, a body softened by age and grief and survival. I wondered if this was how society slowly erased women like me, not all at once, but piece by piece. Until eventually even your own family stopped seeing the woman you were and only saw the inconvenience you might someday become. A few weeks later, Ryan and Vanessa hosted another dinner party. I almost declined. But Ryan sounded hopeful on the phone. "Come on, Mom, it'll be nice." So I baked Harold's favorite cornbread casserole and drove downtown. The moment I walked in, Vanessa's eyes scanned my outfit. I'd worn a lavender sweater and pearl earrings, simple, clean, respectable. Vanessa smiled thinly. "Oh," she said. "You wore that?" I looked down automatically. "Yes." "No, it's fine," she replied quickly. "It's just a little mature." Mature. The polite modern word for old. Throughout dinner, the conversation revolved around luxury travel, real estate investments, and social media engagement numbers. I barely spoke. At one point, one of Vanessa's influencer friends asked where I lived. When I mentioned my modest neighborhood, the woman blinked. "Oh, wow," she said. "That area is still affordable, right?" Vanessa laughed softly before I could answer. "That's one way to describe it." Everyone chuckled politely. I stared down at my plate while heat spread slowly across my chest. Ryan heard it. I know he did. But instead of correcting Vanessa, he changed the subject entirely. That hurt more than the joke itself. After dinner, while helping load dishes into the dishwasher, I quietly asked Ryan if we could talk privately. He sighed before I even spoke. That sigh broke something in me, because it sounded like exhaustion, like I was already too much. "What's wrong?" he asked. I kept my voice calm. "Do you think Vanessa respects me?" Ryan rubbed his forehead immediately. "Mom?" "No, I'm asking seriously. She's just different from you. That's not an answer." Ryan looked irritated now. "You take everything personally." I stared at him. "That woman openly humiliates me. She jokes around. She talks about me like I'm a burden." Ryan crossed his arms. "You're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" I felt suddenly dizzy hearing my own son dismiss me so easily. Ryan, I whispered, I gave my entire life to raising you. His expression softened briefly. I know. Then why do you let her treat me this way? He looked away, and that silence told me more than any answer could have. Because silence is agreement when someone you love is being hurt. I drove home crying again that night, but this time felt different. This time, something inside me was beginning to harden, not into bitterness, into awareness. A few days later, I made the mistake of checking Vanessa's Instagram story. I rarely use social media, but one of my church friends mentioned seeing Ryan online constantly now, so I looked. Vanessa had posted photos from the dinner party, beautiful lighting, fancy cocktails, perfect smiles, and underneath one photo of herself and Ryan, she'd written, "Trying to build the life we deserve while dealing with unnecessary stress." Thousands of people liked it. Then I noticed the next story. A short video clip of my casserole dish sitting on the counter. Vanessa zoomed in dramatically and typed, "When your husband's family still thinks it's 1987. A laughing emoji followed. My stomach dropped. Hundreds of strangers were mocking the food I had lovingly made with my own hands. One comment read, "She seems like such a boomer, MIL." Another said, "Bet, she guilts him constantly." I sat there staring at my phone in complete silence, and for the first time, I realized Vanessa wasn't only humiliating me privately anymore. She was turning me into entertainment. That night, I walked into my bedroom and opened Harold's old cedar chest. Inside were letters, photographs, and memories from a life that once felt safe. I picked up a photo of Ryan at age 8 sitting on Harold's shoulders. They were both laughing, so happy, so innocent. I touched the picture gently and whispered the question I'd been too afraid to say out loud before. When did we lose him? Harold, but deep down, I already feared the truth. Maybe I hadn't lost Ryan all at once. Maybe I'd lost him slowly every single time I chose peace over confrontation, while Vanessa learned there would never be consequences for cruelty. 3 weeks before my 67th birthday, Ryan called me unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my kitchen, trimming dead leaves off my hydrangeas by the window when my phone rang. "Hey, Mom," he said warmly. Warmly. That alone surprised me. "Hi, sweetheart. We've been talking?" He continued, "And Vanessa and I want to do something special for your birthday this year." I smiled despite myself. "Oh, we made reservations at Bella Vita." I nearly dropped my gardening scissors. Bella Vita was one of the most expensive restaurants in downtown Columbus. White tablecloths, private wine rooms, the kind of place where waiters described olive oil like poetry. "Oh, Ryan," I laughed softly. "That's too much." "No, it isn't," he said quickly. "You deserve something nice." Something inside me stirred cautiously. Hope. Dangerous thing. Hope, especially for mothers. For the rest of the afternoon, I caught myself smiling for no reason. I even called my friend Denise from church. "He's planning something special," I told her quietly. "Well, of course he is," Denise replied. "You're his mother." I wanted to believe that. God help me, I really did. 2 days later, Vanessa called personally. That almost never happened. "Autumn," she said brightly, "I'm so excited about your dinner." Her exaggerated sweetness immediately made me uneasy. "That's kind of you." "Oh, and one thing," she added casually. "Please don't wear one of your usual outfits." I blinked. "My usual outfits." You know, she laughed lightly, something a little more elevated. Elevated. That word again. I stared out my kitchen window. "I'll dress appropriately." "Perfect," she chirped. "This place is very upscale, and a lot of Ryan's professional contacts will be there." Professional contacts, I thought this was a birthday dinner. Before hanging up, Vanessa added one more sentence. "And Autumn, maybe let me help with your makeup when you arrive?" The silence that followed felt strange. I smiled politely anyway. "That won't be necessary." After the call ended, I sat alone at my kitchen table for a long time. There was something performative about all of it. Too polished, too deliberate, and deep down, I knew Vanessa never did anything unless there was an audience involved. Still, I tried convincing myself maybe this was her awkward version of kindness. Maybe Ryan had finally spoken to her. Maybe they genuinely wanted peace. That night, I opened my closet and stared at my dresses. I owned exactly 3 good dresses, one black, one burgundy, and one navy blue dress Harold bought me 15 years earlier before a firefighter charity banquet. The navy one had always been his favorite. "You look elegant in blue," he used to say. I touched the fabric gently and smiled sadly. Harold had been gone 16 years, but some days I still instinctively turned to tell him things. That's the strange part about losing someone after decades together. Your heart keeps forgetting they're gone. The following Sunday after church, I visited Ryan and Vanessa's townhouse to drop off banana bread. Vanessa opened the door wearing workout clothes that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. "Oh, good," she said distractedly while texting. "You're here." I stepped inside slowly. The house looked even more expensive than before. New marble coffee table, fresh designer chairs, huge abstract paintings. Everything sleek and cold and carefully chosen to impress people. Nothing felt lived in. Vanessa glanced at me. "So have you picked a dress yet?" "Yes." "What color, navy?" She wrinkled her nose slightly. "Well, dark colors can age people." I smiled faintly. "At my age, I think we're past miracles." She laughed too hard at that. Then Ryan walked downstairs. And for a moment I saw my boy again. "Mom." He hugged me quickly. "You smell like banana bread." "That's because I brought banana bread." He grinned. A real grin. Not the tired, distracted expression he wore lately around Vanessa. My heart squeezed painfully at how much I missed even tiny moments like that. We sat in the kitchen while Vanessa answered emails nearby. Ryan told me about a commercial property deal he was working on downtown. I listened proudly. No matter how complicated things became, hearing my son talk passionately still warmed me. Then Vanessa interrupted suddenly. "Oh, remind me," she said to Ryan. "Did you handle the paperwork issue?" Ryan froze briefly. "Not yet." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Well, you need to before the dinner." Something in the room shifted instantly. Tiny, but noticeable. I looked between them. "What paperwork?" Vanessa smiled too quickly. "Oh, nothing exciting. Just financial planning stuff." Ryan avoided my eyes. That uneasy feeling returned immediately. Before I could ask more, Vanessa's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. "It's Claire," she muttered before walking toward the living room. A few seconds later, Ryan stood. I should help Vanessa with something upstairs. Then he disappeared too. I sat alone in the kitchen listening to muffled voices upstairs, while my instincts screamed quietly inside me. After years as a nurse, I learned something important. People often sense danger before they understand it. And suddenly I felt danger everywhere. That evening after I returned home, Benjamin Turner called. Benjamin had been Harold's closest friend before becoming our attorney decades ago. He was 72 now. Calm, sharp, impossible to intimidate. "Autumn," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something." My stomach tightened. "All right. Have you recently signed any financial transfer forms?" "No." "Any medical authorization documents?" "No." Silence. Then Benjamin sighed. "Someone contacted my office requesting copies of certain trust-related materials." I sat up straighter. "Who I legally can't disclose details yet," he said gently, "but I can tell you the request involved your long-term care arrangements." My chest turned cold. Long-term care. There it was again. The same phrase wrapped in fake concern. I gripped the phone tighter. "Benjamin, are Ryan and Vanessa trying to do something?" Another pause. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I think you should be cautious." After we hung up, I walked slowly through my house, turning off lights one by one. The living room lamp, the hallway, the kitchen. Everything suddenly felt fragile. Because when strangers hurt you, it's painful. But when family starts discussing your future behind closed doors, it feels like your entire life is quietly being stolen while you're still standing inside it. 2 nights later, I accidentally confirmed my fears. Ryan had invited me to dinner again, but he was running late from work. Vanessa thought I was in the downstairs bathroom instead. I had paused near the hallway when I heard her speaking on speakerphone with Claire. Claire laughed loudly through the phone. "So is everything ready for the birthday dinner?" Vanessa answered confidently. "Oh, absolutely." Then came the sentence that made my blood run cold. "By the end of that night, everyone's finally going to see who she really is." The two sisters laughed together. I stood frozen in silence. Claire asked, and Ryan's actually going along with it, Vanessa scoffed. "He knows this has to happen eventually." I couldn't breathe properly. My own son, my own child. Then Vanessa said something even worse. "Honestly, once the paperwork's signed, this whole situation becomes much easier." Paperwork. My hands began trembling. At that moment, a floorboard creaked beneath me accidentally. The conversation stopped instantly. I walked into the kitchen pretending I'd heard nothing. Vanessa smiled brightly, too brightly. "Autumn." There you are. I smiled back just as politely. But inside, something had finally changed. Because for the first time, I stopped wondering whether they were plotting something and started wondering how far they were willing to go. The morning of my birthday arrived gray and cold. Ohio winters have a certain heaviness to them. The sky hangs low, the trees look brittle and exhausted. Even the silence outside feels sharper somehow. I woke before sunrise after barely sleeping. For a few moments lying there beneath my quilt, I almost forgot what day it was. Then reality settled back over me. The dinner, Vanessa's voice. The paperwork, Ryan's silence. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the old grandfather clock downstairs, ticking steadily through the dark. Harold bought that clock during our second year of marriage from an antique store outside Cincinnati. He loved old things with history. People throw away too much nowadays, he used to say. Funny enough, I think he meant more than furniture. Eventually, I got up and made coffee. My kitchen felt peaceful in the early morning light. Safe. The kind of safe you only appreciate once the outside world starts feeling hostile. I wrapped both hands around my mug and tried convincing myself not to go to the dinner. I could fake being sick. I could avoid the humiliation entirely. But another voice inside me whispered something stronger. If your son is truly betraying you, you need to hear it directly. Not through overheard conversations, not through suspicion. Truth has a cruel way of demanding witnesses. Around 9 o'clock, Benjamin Turner called. "Happy birthday, Autumn," he said gently. "Thank you. You sound tired." "I didn't sleep much." Benjamin paused. "I don't like this situation." Neither did I. I leaned against the kitchen counter. "Tell me honestly, how worried should I be?" Benjamin exhaled slowly. "I reviewed the inquiries again this morning. Someone has been asking questions regarding incapacity procedures and trust access." My stomach tightened. Incapacity, yes. I closed my eyes briefly. That word terrified older people for a reason. One accusation, one manipulated evaluation, one carefully crafted narrative that you're confused or declining. And suddenly people begin treating you like you no longer belong to yourself. "Do you think Ryan knows?" I whispered. Benjamin took too long to answer. That he finally said carefully is what worries me most. Tears burned behind my eyes instantly, because silence can still break your heart even at 67 years old. Benjamin continued speaking. "Autumn, listen to me carefully. Do not sign anything tonight. Nothing. Even if Ryan pressures you emotionally, I understand. And there's one more thing." His tone shifted. "The trust documents regarding the townhouse are secure, but I think you should bring a copy with you." I frowned slightly. "You think it might come to that?" "I think," Benjamin said quietly, "you should be prepared for people to behave differently when they believe money is involved." After we hung up, I stood motionless in my kitchen. Prepared. Interesting word. Women like me spend most of our lives preparing everyone else for comfort, while nobody prepares us for betrayal. Around noon, I finally forced myself upstairs to choose my clothes. My bedroom still looked almost identical to how Harold left it years ago. Same walnut dresser, same framed photo of us at Niagara Falls, same faded Bible on his nightstand. I opened my closet slowly. There hung the navy blue dress, simple, elegant, timeless. Harold loved that dress because he said it made my eyes look brighter. I touched the sleeve gently and suddenly remembered the night he bought it for me. We'd attended a firefighter charity gala downtown. I'd worried the dress looked too plain compared to the other women there. But Harold spent half the evening staring at me like I was the only person in the room. "You know what your problem is, Autumn," he whispered while we danced. "What you don't realize how beautiful you are." I broke down crying the moment the memory hit me. Not loud sobbing, just quiet widow tears sliding down my face while I stood alone in front of a closet. Because grief never truly leaves. It simply waits silently inside ordinary moments. After a while, I wiped my face carefully and got dressed. Then I opened my jewelry box. Inside rested Harold's watch, a silver Omega he wore for nearly 20 years. Ryan used to beg to try it on when he was little. "Careful," Harold would laugh. "That watch is older than your mother's patience." I smiled faintly at the memory. I had planned to give Ryan the watch tonight, a birthday gift from father to son, even all these years later. Part of me still wanted to believe the boy Harold raised was somewhere inside the man Ryan had become. I placed the watch carefully into a velvet box, then I retrieved something else from my dresser drawer. The trust documents. I stared at them for a long moment. Years ago, after Harold died, Benjamin had advised me to place certain assets into a protected trust structure. mostly precautionary. At the time, I barely understood the details. Now I silently thanked God for Benjamin Turner, because Ryan and Vanessa believed the townhouse belonged fully to them. It didn't. Legally, ownership remained tied to my trust. Ryan had never bothered asking detailed questions when I helped with the down payment years earlier. He simply assumed generosity meant surrender. That assumption might soon become very important. Around 4 o'clock, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. It was Denise from church holding a small chocolate cake. "Birthday girl," she smiled warmly. I nearly cried just seeing genuine kindness. We sat together in the kitchen for about an hour, talking quietly while snow drifted outside. Denise studied me carefully at one point. "You're nervous about tonight." I hesitated, then nodded. "I think something's wrong." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Autumn, can I tell you something?" "Of course. You spend so much time trying to protect other people from discomfort that you forget you deserve protection too." That sentence stayed with me after she left. You deserve protection too. Mothers rarely hear that, especially mothers from my generation. We were taught endurance instead. Endure loneliness, endure disrespect, endure disappointment, endure aging, endure being slowly erased. But that evening, while applying lipstick in my bathroom mirror, I noticed something surprising inside myself. Not fear, clarity. For the first time in months, I stopped worrying about keeping peace, because peace built on humiliation isn't peace at all. At 6:30, Ryan texted me, "On our way." "Reservations at 7:30. Vanessa says don't be late." That smiley face felt strange, artificial, like a decoration placed over something rotten. I grabbed my coat, my purse, the velvet watch box, and the trust documents. Before leaving, I paused in the hallway beside Harold's photograph. He wore his firefighter uniform in that picture. Strong shoulders, gentle eyes. I touched the frame softly. "I wish you were here," I whispered. Then, after a long silence, I added something else. "But if our son has truly lost his way tonight, help me survive hearing it." Outside, snowflakes drifted slowly beneath the streetlights. Everything looked peaceful. Beautiful, even. Funny how betrayal often arrives dressed in beautiful things. Beautiful restaurants, beautiful smiles, beautiful lies. And as I drove toward downtown Columbus with Harold's watch beside me and legal documents hidden in my purse, I had no idea that before the night ended, my own daughter-in-law would publicly humiliate me in front of an entire restaurant. And my son would let her. Downtown Columbus glittered with winter lights when I arrived at Bella Vita. Snow lined the sidewalks in soft white piles, while valet attendants hurried through the cold beneath golden lamps. The restaurant windows glowed warmly against the dark evening, elegant and inviting. For a moment, sitting alone inside my car, I almost convinced myself I had imagined everything. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Vanessa's cruel comments had simply built into paranoia. Maybe tonight truly was an attempt to reconnect. Then I saw Claire Reed through the restaurant window laughing loudly beside Vanessa, and the uneasy feeling returned instantly. I took a slow breath before stepping out of the car. The cold air stung my cheeks as I walked toward the entrance, carrying my purse and the small velvet box containing Harold's watch. A young hostess smiled brightly when I entered. "Good evening." "Good evening." She checked a reservation list. "Cox party." "Yes." Her smile shifted slightly, almost sympathetic. "Right this way." That tiny change unsettled me immediately. As we walked through the restaurant, I noticed something strange. The private dining room was filled almost entirely with Vanessa's people. Influencers, business contacts, women in sleek dresses taking photos of cocktails, men in expensive watches discussing investment portfolios. I recognized almost nobody, not a single one of my church friends, not Denise, not any of Ryan's childhood family friends, not even Harold's brother from Cincinnati. This wasn't a family birthday dinner, it was an audience. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. Vanessa wanted witnesses. Autumn. Vanessa stood immediately when she saw me. She wore a fitted ivory dress and diamonds at her ears. Perfect makeup, perfect hair, perfect smile. Everything about her looked curated, performative. She air-kissed my cheek carefully. "Oh, wow," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "You actually dressed up?" A few people laughed softly. I smiled politely. Ryan approached next. For 1 second I saw discomfort flicker across his face when he looked at me. Real discomfort. Almost guilt. "You look nice, Mom," he said quietly. "Nice. Not beautiful, not elegant. Just nice." Still I forced warmth into my voice. Happy to be here. But even as I spoke, my eyes scanned the room carefully. And that's when I noticed the seating arrangement. The long table had been organized almost strategically. Vanessa sat near the center beside Ryan. Claire sat directly across from them, the important guests clustered nearby. And my seat, at the very far end of the table, half hidden beside a decorative column, separated from Ryan by 6 other people, like an afterthought. Or worse, like someone intentionally isolated. Vanessa noticed me looking. "Oh, I hope you don't mind the seating," she said brightly. "We had to organize people by networking compatibility." Networking compatibility. At a birthday dinner? I sat down slowly. The chair beside me remained empty for several minutes until a junior real estate associate named Trevor finally took the spot after checking with Vanessa first. Everything about the evening felt choreographed, calculated, as waiters poured wine. Conversations flowed around me without ever fully including me. People discussed luxury vacations in Greece, investment strategies, brand partnerships, private schools. Every topic seemed carefully designed to remind me I didn't belong in their world. At one point, Claire glanced at my purse sitting beside my chair. "Oh my God," she laughed lightly. "Vintage leather is actually trending again." Vanessa smirked into her wine glass. "That purse is older than my marriage." Several guests chuckled politely. I smiled weakly while heat crept into my face. Ryan stared at his plate, didn't say a word. Again. The humiliation itself hurt, but Ryan's silence was slowly becoming unbearable, because every moment he allowed it to happen felt like confirmation. He saw my pain, and chose convenience over courage. Dinner continued. Appetizers arrived, expensive little portions arranged like artwork. I barely tasted anything. Instead, I watched people. Watched Vanessa carefully. She kept glancing toward Ryan every few minutes, as if waiting for something. Then I noticed the envelope. It sat partially hidden beside Ryan's seat beneath a folded napkin. Cream-colored, legal-sized. And even from several feet away, I recognized my own name typed across the front. Autumn Cox. My stomach dropped instantly. I looked away before anyone noticed, but now everything made horrifying sense. The fake birthday dinner, the audience. The strange phone calls, Benjamin's warning, the discussions about incapacity. They weren't planning a celebration. They were planning pressure. Public pressure. I suddenly remembered something from my nursing days. Families often manipulated elderly relatives more easily in public because older people hated causing scenes, especially women raised to stay polite. Vanessa knew that. She knew humiliation and social pressure could force people into compliance faster than threats ever could. And for the first time that night, I became absolutely certain. They intended to get my signature before dessert. A waiter approached with another bottle of wine. Vanessa raised her glass dramatically. "To family," she announced. Everyone echoed the toast. I lifted my glass too, though my hand trembled slightly. "To family," I repeated quietly. The word tasted bitter now. Halfway through the main course, Vanessa suddenly leaned toward one of her influencer friends. Not quietly enough. "I swear Ryan got his work ethic from himself," she laughed, because it definitely wasn't inherited. The table erupted in awkward laughter. My chest tightened painfully. Ryan smiled nervously but still said nothing, not one word. I looked down at my plate to steady myself, and suddenly memories flooded me without warning. Ryan at 11 years old sleeping in hospital waiting rooms while I worked double shifts. Ryan at 16 crying because he thought he'd never afford college. Ryan at 22 hugging me after graduation. Everything I sacrificed, everything I survived. And somehow, it had led here. To sitting at the edge of a fancy table while strangers laughed at the woman who built my son's entire life. Claire leaned forward suddenly. "So, Autumn," she asked sweetly, "have you ever considered downsizing?" There it was, the setup beginning. I met her eyes calmly. "I like my house." "Well, sure," Claire laughed, "but eventually it becomes harder for older people to manage homes alone." Vanessa jumped in immediately. "We actually worry about you sometimes." Worry. Such an ugly word when spoken by manipulative people. Ryan finally spoke. "We just want to make sure you're secure long-term mom." Secure. Another carefully chosen word. I folded my napkin slowly into my lap. "And what exactly does that mean?" Ryan glanced briefly toward the envelope. Tiny movement, but I saw it. Vanessa noticed me noticing. Her smile sharpened slightly, and in that exact moment I understood something crucial. This dinner wasn't simply about humiliating me. Humiliation was only the beginning. The real goal was control. I suddenly felt strangely calm, not weak, not frightened. Calm in the way people become calm right before storms finally break. Because now I knew the truth. And once truth becomes visible, fear starts losing power. Vanessa lifted her wineglass again, eyes glittering beneath the chandelier lights. "Oh," she said sweetly before dessert. "Ryan and I actually prepared something special for Autumn." The room quieted expectantly. Several guests smiled. Someone picked up a phone to record. My pulse slowed instead of quickened, because deep down, I already knew whatever came next was going to change all our lives forever. The entire room quieted when Vanessa stood up with her wineglass. Even the waiters seemed to pause. Soft jazz still played somewhere in the background, but suddenly every sound inside Bella Vita felt distant, muted, like the whole restaurant was holding its breath. Vanessa smiled beautifully beneath the chandelier lights. That was the terrifying thing about people like her. Cruelty always looked prettier when wrapped in charm. Well, she began lightly. "I just want to say how happy we all are to celebrate Autumn tonight." Polite applause scattered around the room. I sat perfectly still. Ryan stared at the table. Vanessa continued. "Birthdays are important because they remind us how much people grow, and also how much they refuse to." A few nervous chuckles followed. Claire grinned immediately. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face calm. Vanessa walked slowly around the table while speaking almost like she was performing on stage. And honestly, she sighed dramatically. Family relationships can be complicated. More silence. She glanced toward me, especially when one person refuses to adapt to the life everyone else is trying to build. There it was. The beginning. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One woman lowered her wineglass slowly, but Vanessa kept going. "You know, Ryan works incredibly hard," she said proudly. "He's built a respected career. He's created opportunities. He's elevated himself." Elevated. That word again. Then Vanessa smiled directly at me. "But sometimes people from older generations don't understand how much appearances matter." The humiliation was no longer subtle now. It was deliberate, targeted, public. I heard someone clear their throat awkwardly nearby. Ryan still said nothing, not one word. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically. "Autumn has always preferred simpler things," she continued. "And there's nothing wrong with simplicity." Her smile sharpened. "Unless simplicity becomes refusal to grow." Claire laughed loudly. "Oh my God, yes." Vanessa picked up speed after that, energized by the attention. "She still shops like it's 1995. More laughter. "She refuses modern upgrades." Another wave of uncomfortable chuckling. "She brings casseroles to networking dinners." Now several people avoided looking at me entirely. Because decent people become uncomfortable when witnessing cruelty in real time, but weak people stay silent because confrontation threatens comfort, and apparently weakness had spread around that table like disease. Vanessa stopped directly beside my chair. "Honestly," she said with a fake sigh, "sometimes I think Ryan feels embarrassed." My chest tightened sharply. Finally, Ryan looked up. "Vanessa?" But his voice lacked strength, lacked conviction. She touched his shoulder dramatically. "No, sweetheart. Let's be honest tonight. Tonight." This had all been planned. Every word, every moment, every humiliation. Vanessa looked down at me while the room watched. "You know what the problem is?" "Autumn," I met her eyes quietly. "You confuse surviving with succeeding." The sentence hit harder than I expected, because it carried genuine contempt, not frustration, not misunderstanding, contempt. Vanessa saw my entire life, my sacrifices, my simplicity, my widowhood as failure. I could feel my pulse in my throat now, but I refused to cry. Not in front of these people, not for her. Vanessa picked up my purse from beside my chair suddenly. My old brown leather purse Harold bought decades ago. "Oh my God," she laughed loudly, holding it up. "This thing belongs in a museum." Claire nearly choked laughing. A few guests looked horrified now. Ryan stood halfway from his chair. Vanessa enough. But even then, he sounded embarrassed. "Not protective?" Vanessa ignored him completely. "Do you know how hard it is," she said to the room, "trying to build a sophisticated life while constantly being dragged backward by people who refuse to evolve?" Her eyes flicked toward me again. And suddenly I understood something important. This wasn't about money anymore. Vanessa genuinely believed people like me were beneath people like her. Older women, quiet women, women who sacrificed instead of performing success online. To Vanessa, I represented everything unfashionable about aging, everything she feared becoming someday herself, and because of that, she needed to humiliate me publicly, to prove distance between us, to reassure herself she would never end up ordinary. Vanessa slowly set my purse back down. Then she picked up her wineglass again. Red wine shimmered beneath the lights, beautiful, dangerous, just like her. You know, she said softly, Ryan, and I have spent years trying to help you fit into the world we live in now. Years. As though my existence had been some exhausting burden they patiently tolerated. But some people, Vanessa continued coldly, choose to stay cheap. The word landed like a slap. Cheap, not poor, cheap. As though my value as a human being could be measured through brands and appearances. I saw several guests glance toward Ryan desperately now, waiting, begging silently for him to stop this. Ryan looked pale, ashamed, but he still didn't move. And in that moment, something inside me broke forever. Not my pride, not my dignity, my illusion of who my son still was. Because good men do not sit silently while their mothers are destroyed in public, no matter how uncomfortable confrontation feels. Vanessa smiled one final time. Then, without warning, she threw the wine directly into my face. Cold liquid exploded across my skin. Gasps filled the room instantly. The red wine splashed across my navy dress, my pearls, my hands. Drops slid slowly down my cheeks like blood. Vanessa stared at me with satisfaction, and then she said the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. Now you finally look as cheap as you are. Complete silence. A fork clattered somewhere across the room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I sat frozen while wine dripped from my chin onto the white tablecloth, and strangely enough, I didn't feel embarrassment first. I felt heartbreak. Because the first face I looked toward wasn't Vanessa's. It was Ryan's. My son looked horrified, but not horrified enough, because he still stayed seated. Still frozen, still choosing silence. "Mom," he whispered weakly. That single word nearly destroyed me. I stared at him across the table, at the boy I once carried through fevers, the teenager I worked double shifts to protect, the man I loved more than my own comfort for 41 years. And suddenly I realized something unbearable. I no longer recognized him. The room remained painfully quiet. Several guests looked away in shame. Others stared openly. One woman quietly lowered her phone from recording. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively now, as if already preparing to justify herself. But I barely saw her anymore, because all I could see was Ryan, and the fact that he had allowed this moment to happen. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my napkin and wiped wine from my face. My hands didn't shake. That surprised even me. Maybe because deep down, I had emotionally prepared myself the moment I saw that envelope earlier. I stood slowly from my chair. The room watched every movement. Vanessa's confidence flickered slightly now. Maybe she expected screaming, crying, begging. But pain changes shape when it becomes too deep. And suddenly mine had become very calm. I looked directly at Ryan. Not Vanessa. Only Ryan. Then I asked quietly, "Did you know she planned this?" The question echoed through the silent room. Ryan opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Vanessa, then back at me. And in those few horrible seconds, his silence gave me my answer. Yes. Maybe not every detail, maybe not the wine itself, but enough. Enough to stop it. Enough to warn me. Enough to protect me. And he chose not to. I nodded slowly, not because I accepted it, because I finally understood it. Then my eyes drifted toward the cream-colored envelope beside his plate. I watched panic flash briefly across Vanessa's face. And suddenly, everything became clear. This dinner had never been about humiliation alone. The humiliation was simply meant to weaken me before they asked for something much worse. Ryan looked like a man standing on collapsing ground. His face had gone pale beneath the restaurant lights, and for one brief second I saw genuine shame in his eyes. But shame without courage changes nothing. The room remained silent after my question. "Did you know she planned this?" Vanessa crossed her arms immediately. "Oh, please," she snapped. "Don't act like you're some innocent victim." Several people shifted uncomfortably. A woman near the far end of the table quietly whispered, "Jesus Christ," under her breath. Ryan finally stood up. "Mom," he said softly, "please sit down." That sentence hit me harder than the wine. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Vanessa, what the hell is wrong with you?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just, "Please sit down." As though my pain was becoming inconvenient, I stared at my son for a long moment. Wine still stained the front of my dress. My pearls were sticky against my neck. I could smell the sharp bitterness of Cabernet soaking into fabric Harold once loved, and suddenly I felt tired. Not physically. Soul-deep tired. The kind of exhaustion older women carry after spending decades absorbing disappointment quietly. Vanessa grabbed the cream-colored envelope from beside Ryan's plate. "Well," she said coldly, "since the evening's already emotional, we might as well finish this conversation honestly." Ryan looked alarmed. "Vanessa?" "No," she interrupted sharply. "We've avoided this for too long." She slid the envelope toward me across the table. The sound of paper against linen felt unbearably loud in the silence. I looked down at my name typed neatly across the front. Autumn Cox. "Open it," Vanessa said. I didn't move. Ryan rubbed his forehead anxiously. "Mom, it's not what you think." The fact that he already knew what I thought told me everything. Slowly, carefully, I picked up the envelope with wine-stained fingers. Inside sat several legal documents, medical authorization forms, financial control agreements, long-term assisted living recommendations. My vision blurred briefly, not from confusion, from heartbreak. Vanessa leaned forward, suddenly adopting a softer voice for the audience watching. "We're worried about you, Autumn." There it was again. That fake concern, that polished manipulation disguised as love. I flipped through the papers slowly. One document proposed granting Ryan authority over my finances in the event of cognitive decline. Another referenced evaluating whether independent living remained appropriate. Appropriate. What a cruel little word. It sounded caring while quietly stealing freedom. "You want control over my accounts," I said calmly. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "We want to protect you." I looked at Ryan. "And this was your idea too." Ryan swallowed hard. "It's just precautionary planning?" Precautionary planning. Interesting how betrayal always arrives wearing professional language. I stared at him in disbelief. "You think I'm incapable of managing my own life?" "No," Ryan answered quickly. "Not now. Not now." 2 words. 2 devastating words. Meaning someday soon they expected to decide when my independence ended. Vanessa jumped in again. "You're 67, Autumn." These conversations happen in responsible families. Responsible families? I almost laughed. Because nothing about this felt responsible. It felt predatory. The room had become painfully tense now. Some guests openly avoided eye contact. Others pretended to study menus or refill drinks. Nobody wanted involvement. That's the ugly truth about public cruelty. Most people witness it quietly because moral courage is rarer than kindness. Claire finally spoke up from across the table. "No offense, Autumn, but eventually people your age need help." I turned toward her slowly. "My age?" Claire shrugged carelessly. "You know what I mean." No, I knew exactly what she meant. Older, disposable, manageable. People like Claire always spoke about aging as though it transformed human beings into burdens instead of survivors. I placed the papers carefully back into the envelope. Then I looked directly at Ryan again. "Did you truly believe humiliating me first would make me more likely to sign these?" Ryan looked stunned. "What?" No, Vanessa interrupted instantly. "This isn't about humiliation." I met her gaze calmly. "Then why invite an audience? Silence. Beautiful, uncomfortable silence. Because now people were starting to understand. This dinner had not spiraled accidentally. It had been orchestrated." Vanessa's face hardened. "You know what your problem is?" she snapped. "You refuse to face reality." I folded my hands together carefully to stop them trembling. "And what reality is that? That Ryan has his own life now?" She exploded. "You cling to him emotionally, financially, socially." "Financially," I repeated softly. Ryan visibly flinched. Vanessa realized too late she'd chosen the wrong word. I noticed. And so did Ryan. "You know," I continued quietly, "that's interesting, considering I paid part of Ryan's graduate tuition." Ryan looked up sharply. Vanessa froze. "And the townhouse down payment," I added. Claire blinked. "What?" Ryan looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "Mom?" "No," I said calmly. "Let's be honest tonight." Remember, Vanessa's jaw tightened instantly. I continued softly. "I spent decades sacrificing quietly for my son because I loved him, not because I expected ownership in return." The room stayed completely silent. I turned toward Ryan fully now, but what I never expected? My voice cracked slightly, despite myself. was to become something you and your wife discuss managing like a business problem. Ryan's eyes filled suddenly. For one brief moment, I saw the boy he used to be. Mom, it's not like that. Then explain it to me. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because there was no explanation good enough. Not for the wine. Not for the silence. Not for the papers hidden beneath birthday candles and expensive dinners. Vanessa suddenly scoffed loudly. Oh my God, this is exactly why we needed this conversation. I turned slowly toward her. She leaned forward aggressively, now abandoning her fake sweetness completely. You manipulate Ryan with guilt constantly. The accusation stunned me. Excuse me. You act fragile, so he'll feel responsible for you. Several people exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ryan whispered sharply, Vanessa, stop. But she couldn't stop anymore. Cruel people rarely stop once they taste power publicly. You know what, she snapped. Someone needed to say it. Ryan's entire adult life has revolved around protecting your feelings. Protecting my feelings. I almost laughed again. This woman had no idea how many tears I swallowed privately just to avoid burdening my son. No idea how many lonely nights I spent pretending I was fine. No idea how many humiliations I endured silently to preserve peace. And suddenly, something inside me became very still, very clear. I realized I was no longer afraid of losing Ryan's approval, because the son I had spent years protecting no longer existed in the form sitting across from me now. The realization hurt, but strangely, it also freed me. I reached slowly into my purse. Ryan immediately stiffened. Mom. I pulled out the small velvet box instead. Confusion crossed his face. I brought this for you tonight, I said quietly. I placed the box in front of him. Ryan opened it slowly. The moment he saw Harold's watch, his face crumpled. Oh, God. His voice broke completely. That was Dad's. Yes. Ryan stared at the watch with trembling hands. For a second, the entire restaurant disappeared around us. There was only a mother and her son sitting inside the wreckage of love. I was going to give it to you before all this happened, I whispered. Ryan looked shattered now. Real tears filled his eyes. And for the first time all night, Vanessa looked nervous, because she finally understood something dangerous. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about a son realizing exactly what kind of man he had become. I looked at Ryan one last time, then quietly asked the question that changed everything. Before you asked me to sign away control of my life, Ryan, did you ever bother asking who actually owns yours? The confusion on his face told me immediately. No, he didn't know. And neither did Vanessa. Ryan stared at me in confusion. What does that mean? His voice sounded smaller now, less certain. For the first time all evening, Vanessa looked uneasy instead of superior. I reached slowly into my purse again and removed a folded set of documents. Not dramatically, not angrily, calmly. That calmness frightened Vanessa more than tears ever could have. Because manipulative people know how to fight emotion. What they don't know how to fight is composure. I placed the papers carefully on the table between us. Ryan frowned. What is this? The truth, I answered quietly. Vanessa immediately leaned forward. What truth? I looked directly at her. The townhouse you've been living in for the last 6 years. I paused. Belongs to my trust? Complete silence. Ryan blinked. No, it doesn't. It does. That's impossible. I slid the top document toward him. Read the ownership structure. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the papers. I watched confusion slowly turn into disbelief. Then horror. Because suddenly he understood. The down payment I loaned years earlier had never been a simple gift. Benjamin Turner had structured the property through a protected family trust after Harold died. Ryan had partial occupancy rights and future inheritance considerations, but not full ownership. Not even close. Vanessa snatched the paperwork from Ryan's hands. What the hell is this legal documentation? I replied calmly. This has to be fake. It isn't. Ryan looked pale. Mom, why would you do that? The question almost made me laugh. Why would I protect myself? Because widows learn quickly that security matters. Because Harold wanted safeguards in place. Because life changes people. And sitting there looking at my son and his wife, I silently thanked God I had listened to Benjamin all those years ago. Vanessa flipped through the pages frantically. This says the trust retains controlling interest, she snapped. Yes. That's insane. No, I answered softly. It's cautious. Ryan looked devastated. You never told me. I met his eyes. You never asked. And that was true. Ryan never once sat down with me to understand how anything had been arranged financially. He simply assumed generosity meant surrender. Vanessa suddenly stood up from her chair. You manipulated him. The accusation echoed sharply across the room. I stared at her. Manipulated him. You made him think that was his home? No, I corrected quietly. I helped my son have stability when he couldn't afford it himself. Ryan closed his eyes briefly like someone physically ill. Meanwhile, the guests around us had become completely absorbed now. Nobody was pretending not to listen anymore. Whispers moved around the table. Someone quietly set down a wine glass. One man near the far end slowly muttered, Jesus. Vanessa looked around and realized the room was no longer on her side. That realization made her dangerous. People obsessed with image panic when control slips publicly. You're doing this because you're embarrassed, she hissed at me. I tilted my head slightly. No, I'm doing this because you threw wine in my face while trying to pressure me into surrendering control of my life. Ryan finally spoke louder. Vanessa, enough. She turned on him instantly. Don't start acting innocent now. His face hardened slightly. You planned this. You agreed to it. Ryan froze. There it was. The truth surfacing. Not fully evil, not fully innocent. Just weak. And weakness can destroy people as effectively as cruelty. Ryan rubbed both hands over his face. I thought we were just discussing future planning. By humiliating your mother first? I asked quietly, his eyes filled with shame again. No, but his voice lacked conviction. Because somewhere deep down he had known tonight was wrong, long before the wine ever touched me. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. She refuses to face reality. I looked at her calmly. No, Vanessa. You refuse to respect aging? That silenced her for a second. I continued softly. You see older people as burdens because you worship appearances. But one day, time comes for everyone. Vanessa scoffed loudly. Please spare me the life lesson. No, I said. You need one. Ryan stared at me quietly now. Listening. Really listening for the first time in years. I turned toward him fully. When your father died, I was terrified every single day. The room remained silent. I worked night shifts until my hands bled. I skipped meals. I sold things I loved. I built stability from grief because I wanted you safe. Ryan lowered his head. And I never once made you feel guilty for needing me. Tears slid down his face now. Real tears. Not performative ones. Meanwhile, Vanessa looked furious that the emotional tide was shifting away from her. You always do this, she snapped at me. You make everything emotional so Ryan feels sorry for you. I shook my head slowly. No. I speak emotionally because unlike you, I actually loved someone more than I loved myself. The table went dead quiet. Vanessa's face flushed instantly. Then before she could respond, another voice interrupted from the doorway. She's right. Every head turned. Benjamin Turner stood near the entrance wearing a charcoal overcoat dusted with snow. Calm, steady, carrying a leather briefcase. Vanessa's face drained of color immediately. Ryan whispered, Benjamin. The older attorney walked slowly toward the table. I came because Autumn asked me to remain available tonight. Vanessa tried regaining control instantly. This is completely inappropriate. Benjamin looked at her evenly. What's inappropriate, he replied calmly, is attempting to manipulate an elderly woman into signing legal control documents during a public ambush disguised as a birthday celebration. A few guests audibly gasped. Vanessa laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. Benjamin opened his briefcase carefully. Then he removed printed emails, phone records, consultation requests, and suddenly Vanessa no longer looked powerful. She looked trapped. I was contacted repeatedly over the last several months. Benjamin continued by parties inquiring about incapacity procedures, trust access, and financial authority transfer, involving Autumn Cox. Ryan looked horrified. Vanessa? She spun toward him. Oh, don't act shocked. Now Benjamin's expression sharpened slightly. The concerning part, he continued, was the urgency. The room remained silent enough to hear silverware clink faintly in the distant kitchen. Benjamin adjusted his glasses. There were also questions regarding how quickly independent living rights could be reassessed under claims of emotional instability. My chest tightened hearing the words out loud. Emotional instability, that had been their angle. Not dementia, not medical decline. Emotional vulnerability, widowhood, loneliness, grief. They intended to weaponize my humanity against me. Ryan looked physically sick now. You said this was precautionary, he whispered to Vanessa. It was. No, Benjamin interrupted calmly. It was strategic. Vanessa slammed both hands onto the table suddenly. She's 67 years old and fully competent. Benjamin replied immediately. She lives alone. She manages independently. She's emotionally dependent on Ryan. That sentence echoed horribly through the room. I stared at Vanessa quietly, and suddenly I understood something heartbreaking. She truly believed love itself was weakness, dependence, burden, transaction. Maybe she had never actually experienced unconditional love before, but instead of healing that emptiness, she turned it into cruelty. Ryan looked at her like he no longer recognized her. Meanwhile, I felt something unexpected settling quietly inside me. Not rage, relief, because the truth was finally standing in full light now. No more guessing, no more excuses, no more pretending. Benjamin closed his briefcase slowly. Autumn, he said gently, you do not need to remain here any longer. I looked around the room, at the stained dress, the horrified guests, my broken son, Vanessa's collapsing image, and for the first time all evening, I no longer felt ashamed, because humiliation only works when the victim believes they deserve it. And suddenly I didn't. Vanessa's perfect composure finally cracked. You manipulated this entire situation, she shouted at me across the table. Her voice echoed through the private dining room, sharply enough that people in the main restaurant started turning toward us. Benjamin remained calm beside me. No, he said evenly. Autumn protected herself. Vanessa laughed bitterly. Oh, please. She's been playing helpless for years. I looked at her quietly. And you've been confusing kindness with weakness for years. That hit harder than I expected. Because Vanessa's expression changed instantly. For the first time all night, uncertainty flickered across her face. Ryan remained seated, staring blankly at the trust papers in front of him, like his entire reality had shifted underneath him, which in many ways it had. One of the guests, a middle-aged woman in a silver dress, finally spoke carefully. Vanessa, did you really plan this dinner to pressure her into signing documents? The question landed heavily. Because now someone outside the family had spoken the truth aloud. Vanessa immediately straightened her posture. You're misunderstanding everything. No, Benjamin interrupted calmly. I don't believe we are. He opened his briefcase again. I had hoped this wouldn't become necessary, he said quietly. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. What now? Benjamin removed his phone slowly. Then he placed it on the table. Over the past month, he continued, Autumn became concerned enough about the conversations surrounding her independence that I advised her to document interactions. Ryan looked up sharply. What interactions? Benjamin pressed a button. And suddenly Vanessa's voice filled the silent room. Clear, cold, cruel. If Ryan wasn't so soft about her, I'd already have her in some cute little retirement condo. The entire table froze. Claire's face went white. Vanessa lunged forward instantly. Turn that off. But Benjamin continued. Another recording played. Vanessa laughing. By the end of that night, everyone's finally going to see who she really is. Then Claire's voice, and Ryan's actually going along with it. Vanessa's reply came sharp and smug. He knows this has to happen eventually. Ryan looked physically ill. Vanessa. She spun toward him desperately. You knew we were talking about future planning. Not this, he whispered. Not this. Interesting phrase, because weak people always act shocked once cruelty becomes visible publicly. But cruelty doesn't appear overnight. It grows slowly inside silence. Benjamin pressed play again. This time, Vanessa's voice lowered conspiratorially. Honestly, once the paperwork's signed, this whole situation becomes much easier. Complete silence. No excuses remained now, no misunderstandings, no twisting reality, just truth. Raw and ugly beneath restaurant lights. One of Vanessa's influencer friends quietly stood up and grabbed her purse. Another guest looked openly disgusted. Claire suddenly snapped. Oh, don't act like Vanessa invented this idea herself. Everyone turned toward her. Claire crossed her arms defensively. Ryan complained constantly about how emotionally draining this situation was. Ryan looked horrified. I never said that. Claire scoffed. You absolutely did. Vanessa pointed at Ryan immediately. See? And just like that, the unity between them shattered. Exactly the way selfish alliances always do under pressure, because people bonded through manipulation rarely protect each other once consequences arrive. Ryan stood abruptly from his chair. I never agreed to humiliating my mother. You sat there while it happened, I said quietly. That silenced him instantly, because there was no defense against truth. Ryan looked at me then. really looked at me, at the wine stains still drying across my dress, at my trembling hands, at the humiliation etched across my face despite my calmness, and suddenly I watched the weight of what he'd done hit him fully for the first time. Not abstractly, not theoretically, humanly. Mom. His voice cracked. I swear I didn't know she was going to throw the wine. I believed him. Strangely enough, I truly did, but that no longer mattered. Because allowing cruelty to grow unchecked still makes you responsible for where it eventually leads. You knew enough, I answered softly. Ryan started crying openly then. Not dramatic tears, broken ones. The kind men cry when they realize they've become someone they once promised themselves they'd never be. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. Oh my God, are you serious right now? Ryan looked at her slowly. What happened to you? That question changed the room, because for the first time all night Ryan stopped defending her. Vanessa laughed harshly. What happened to me? I'm the only person here facing reality. No, Ryan whispered. You're cruel. Her face hardened instantly. Cruel, she snapped. I spent years trying to help you build a better life. You humiliated my mother. She humiliated herself by refusing to evolve. The room recoiled slightly at the viciousness in her tone, and suddenly something became very clear to everyone present. Vanessa didn't regret hurting me. She regretted getting caught. Benjamin quietly closed his briefcase. I strongly suggest ending this evening before further damage occurs. But Vanessa wasn't finished. People obsessed with image often become reckless once their image collapses. She pointed directly at me. She manipulated all of you, Vanessa shouted toward the guests. She acts like some innocent old widow, but she's been controlling Ryan emotionally for years. Nobody answered, because now they were seeing her clearly, and there's something deeply terrifying about watching a charming person lose control publicly. Ryan shook his head slowly. You know what's crazy? He whispered. I actually started believing you. Vanessa stared at him. You're blaming me for this. I'm blaming myself too. That surprised me. Ryan looked shattered now, completely stripped of arrogance. He turned toward me slowly. Mom, I'm so sorry. Those words should have healed something, but they didn't. Not yet. Because some wounds bleed too deeply to close immediately. I looked at my son quietly and realized something painful. He truly had loved me once. Maybe he still did, but weak love can become dangerous when mixed with fear ego and the desperate need to please someone else. Vanessa suddenly grabbed her purse aggressively. This is unbelievable. Claire stood too. Come on, we're leaving. But before Vanessa could walk away, a quiet voice spoke from behind me. Mrs. Cox. We all turned. A young waitress stood there holding clean napkins awkwardly against her chest. She looked maybe 23, nervous, embarrassed. She swallowed hard. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened to you. Her kindness hit me harder than all the cruelty tonight. Thank you, I whispered. The young woman hesitated. Then her eyes widened slightly. Oh my God. Everyone looked at her. You're Autumn Cox? I blinked. Yes. Tears instantly filled the girl's eyes. The Harold Cox Scholarship? The room went quiet again. My chest tightened softly. The girl pressed a hand over her mouth. You paid for my nursing program. Vanessa looked confused. What? The waitress stared at me with trembling lips. My mom died when I was 16, she whispered. Your scholarship fund covered almost 2 years of tuition for me. Ryan slowly looked toward me. What scholarship? I closed my eyes briefly. I had never told him, never saw the point. The young woman wiped tears from her face quickly. I wouldn't even be in school without you. And suddenly the entire atmosphere inside that room changed again. Because people were beginning to understand something Vanessa never had. There's a difference between looking wealthy and living richly. Vanessa spent years building an image. But quietly, privately, without applause, I had spent years building lives. The young waitress stood there trembling slightly beside our table, clutching clean linen napkins against her chest. I'm Mia Dawson, she said softly. I wrote you a letter 3 years ago after I received the scholarship. I smiled faintly through exhaustion. I remember your name. Her eyes immediately filled with tears again. That was the truth. I did remember, not every student, but some stories stay with you. Mia had written about losing her mother to cancer while working 2 jobs to finish nursing school. Her letter was handwritten, honest, grateful. Harold would have loved her spirit. Vanessa stared between us in visible confusion. What scholarship? She repeated sharply. Ryan looked at me slowly now. Realization was beginning to move across his face piece by piece. Not just about the trust, about everything. Benjamin answered calmly before I could speak. After Harold passed away, Autumn created a private scholarship fund for students pursuing nursing and emergency medical careers. Ryan blinked. You never told me that. I looked at him quietly. You never asked. The sentence landed differently this time. He lowered his eyes immediately, because now he understood what I meant. For years, he had stopped seeing me as a full person with a private life, private values, private accomplishments. To Ryan and Vanessa, I had slowly become reduced to one role: mother, aging mother, potential responsibility, possible burden, not a woman with depth, history, intelligence, or purpose beyond them. Mia spoke again softly. There are dozens of students because of your fund. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. Oh, please. So now we're pretending she's some kind of saint. Mia looked startled by the hostility. But I wasn't. Cruel people often become crueler when exposed, because humiliation makes them desperate to regain control. Benjamin calmly adjusted his glasses. No one said saint, he replied evenly. But Autumn's contributions to this community are substantial. Ryan looked genuinely stunned now. What contributions? I almost smiled sadly at that. My own son truly didn't know me anymore. Not because I hid things. Because he stopped paying attention years ago. I folded my stained napkin carefully onto the table. After your father died, I began quietly. I had to decide what kind of person grief would make me. The room remained silent. I saw too many people become bitter after loss. Angry. Hard. I looked down briefly. I didn't want that. Mia sat another clean napkin beside me gently before stepping back respectfully. So instead I continued softly, I invested carefully, I saved quietly, and whenever I could help someone without needing recognition for it, I did. Ryan stared at me like he was meeting me for the first time. You built all of that alone? I nodded. Over many years. Benjamin added calmly, Autumn's Trust currently supports scholarships, emergency housing grants for widows, and several medical assistance programs. A man near the far end of the table muttered under his breath, Jesus. Vanessa's face darkened further, because now the contrast had become unbearable. She spent years showcasing luxury online for strangers. Meanwhile, the woman she called cheap quietly changed lives without ever posting about it once. I looked toward Vanessa calmly. You thought simplicity meant failure. She crossed her arms. Well, excuse me for not worshiping struggle. That's not what I valued. Then what did you value? The answer came easily. Peace. The room stayed completely silent. I wore affordable clothes because I didn't need strangers admiring me to feel worthy. I kept my old furniture because memories mattered more to me than trends. I drove a used car because debt frightened me more than appearances. Ryan looked physically devastated now. And I lived carefully. I continued softly because I knew what it felt like to lose everything overnight. Vanessa shook her head sharply. This is unbelievable. No, I said calmly. What's unbelievable is humiliating an older woman publicly because she didn't look wealthy enough for your image. Vanessa's cheeks flushed red. I was trying to help Ryan build a better future. At the cost of his humanity, that silenced her completely. Ryan sat down heavily in his chair and covered his face with both hands. The entire restaurant felt painfully still around us now. Some guests had quietly left already. Others remained frozen, unable to look away. Because there's something deeply unsettling about watching a family implode publicly, especially when everyone slowly realizes who the victim truly was all along. After a long silence, Ryan finally looked up at me again. Mom. His voice cracked badly. How much have I hurt you? The question almost undid me, because for the first time all night he was no longer defending himself. He was finally seeing me. Not as a responsibility, not as an emotional problem, as his mother, as a human being. I swallowed hard before answering. More than you know. Tears rolled down his face openly now. Vanessa looked disgusted by his emotion. Oh my God, Ryan. He turned toward her slowly. No, he whispered. You don't get to do that anymore. Something in his voice had changed. Not strength exactly, but awakening. The terrifying clarity people experience once denial finally collapses. You made me believe she was controlling, he said quietly. Vanessa scoffed. She is controlling. No. Ryan shook his head slowly. She loved me. The room went silent again, Because deep down, everyone understands the difference. Control suffocates, love sacrifices, and mothers like me often sacrifice so quietly that people stop noticing the cost entirely. Vanessa grabbed her purse aggressively. I'm not sitting here while everyone paints me like some villain. Benjamin answered calmly. You painted yourself quite clearly tonight. That nearly made Claire laugh from sheer nervousness before she caught herself. Vanessa looked around the room desperately now, searching for allies, finding none. Because once people witness undeniable cruelty, social loyalty disappears fast, especially among people obsessed with reputation. Then Ryan said something that surprised even me. I think you should leave. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. What, you heard me? Ryan. You threw wine in my mother's face. She manipulated. She loved me, he shouted suddenly. The entire room jumped. Ryan stood now, breathing hard, tears running openly down his face. She spent her entire life loving me while I sat there and let you destroy her. Vanessa looked genuinely shocked, maybe because weak men rarely speak against her. But something inside Ryan had finally broken tonight too. And sometimes broken things become honest for the first time. Vanessa pointed toward me furiously. She hid money. She manipulated ownership. She recorded conversations I answered quietly. I protected myself. Then I looked directly at her. Because deep down, I knew you were dangerous. That hit. Hard. Vanessa's expression cracked completely for one brief second. Not sadness, recognition, because manipulative people hate being seen clearly. She grabbed her coat furiously. This family is insane. Then she stormed toward the exit. Claire hesitated awkwardly before hurrying after her sister. The moment the doors closed behind them, the room exhaled collectively, like everyone had been holding tension in their lungs for hours. Ryan remained standing motionless, broken, ashamed, human again. I looked at him quietly across the ruined birthday table, the wine stains, the untouched cake, the legal papers. Harold's watch still sitting open between us, and suddenly I realized something painful. I had spent so long mourning the son I thought I lost, that I never imagined he might finally see himself clearly only after losing me. For a long moment after Vanessa left, nobody moved. The restaurant felt strangely hollow now, like a theater after the actors forget their lines. Ryan remained standing beside the table, breathing unevenly, while the untouched birthday cake sat melting slowly beneath dim candlelight. My birthday. What a heartbreaking little phrase. I looked down at my stained navy dress and suddenly felt exhausted beyond words. Benjamin touched my shoulder gently. Autumn, he said quietly, let's get you home. I nodded slowly. But before I could reach for my coat, Ryan stepped forward abruptly. Mom, wait. The desperation in his voice stopped me, not because I trusted it, because I remembered it. He sounded suddenly like the little boy who used to run after me, terrified I'd leave without saying goodbye after school. Please, he whispered. I looked at him carefully, and for the first time all night I saw no ego in his face. Only shame, real shame, not embarrassment because people witnessed the disaster. Moral shame, the kind that changes people if they survive it honestly. Ryan swallowed hard. I don't even know how to apologize for this, I answered truthfully. You can't. His eyes filled again. Several remaining guests quietly began leaving, murmuring awkward goodbyes to Benjamin or avoiding eye contact entirely. Nobody knew what to say after witnessing something like this, because there are some moments so intimate in their devastation that outsiders become accidental intruders. Mia approached, carefully holding my winter coat. I had this cleaned as best I could, she said softly. The kindness nearly broke me. Thank you, sweetheart. She hesitated before speaking again. You didn't deserve any of this. My throat tightened painfully. Funny how one sincere sentence can heal more than 100 fake compliments ever could. I touched her hand gently. Yes, I whispered. I know that now. That sentence surprised even me, because for months, maybe years, I had slowly started believing I somehow deserved disrespect for growing older, deserved dismissal for living simply, deserved humiliation for needing love. But standing there in that ruined dining room, wine-stained and exhausted, something inside me had finally awakened. Dignity. The kind women lose gradually when they spend too much time excusing bad behavior from people they love. Ryan picked up Harold's watch from the table carefully. His hands shook. I don't deserve this. No, I said quietly. Not tonight. His face crumpled completely. That answer hurt him more than anger would have, because disappointment cuts deeper than rage. Benjamin began gathering the legal documents calmly into his briefcase. Then he looked directly at Ryan. I strongly recommend giving your mother space. Ryan nodded immediately. I know. But when I turned toward the exit, he followed anyway. Mom, please. I stopped near the restaurant doors but didn't face him immediately. Outside, snow drifted softly beneath the city lights. Everything looked peaceful, which somehow made the night feel even sadder. Ryan's voice cracked behind me. I never wanted this. I turned slowly. Then why did you let it happen? He looked shattered by the question. Because there was no clean answer. No explanation that could erase the silence he chose while his wife humiliated me publicly. I thought... He rubbed his face hard. I thought Vanessa was helping me see things more objectively. Objectively, she kept saying you depended on me emotionally. I stared at him quietly. And did you believe that Ryan looked away? At first, no. The honesty hurt. But after a while, he swallowed hard. I started noticing every phone call, every visit, every time you sounded lonely. Lonely. The word landed heavily between us. Yes, I whispered. I was lonely. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. I know that sounds terrible now. No, I said softly. What sounds terrible is that loneliness became evidence against me instead of something deserving compassion. That silenced him completely, because that was the real tragedy underneath everything. Not money, not property, not even the wine. It was the fact that my vulnerability had slowly become inconvenient to the people I loved most. Ryan leaned against the wall near the entrance like his legs might give out. I became someone Dad would hate tonight. The sentence cut deeply because part of me feared it was true. Harold believed fiercely in protecting people weaker than you, especially family, especially women, especially me. I looked at my son standing there broken beneath restaurant lights and felt something complicated moving through my chest. Not forgiveness, not hatred, grief. Grief for the version of him I thought existed. I don't know who you became, I admitted quietly, but I know it happened slowly. Ryan nodded through tears. I let her convince me you were a burden. The honesty made him look physically ill. I started seeing every call from you as pressure instead of love. I said nothing, because there are moments when silence is kinder than truth. Ryan wiped his face roughly, and the worst part he whispered. You never even asked for anything. No, I hadn't. That's what made the entire thing so heartbreaking. I gave endlessly without demanding repayment. Yet somehow I still became treated like an obligation. Benjamin stepped outside then, giving us both a respectful amount of distance. Snowflakes landed softly against his dark coat while he pretended not to listen. Ryan looked at me desperately. What do I do now? I almost answered automatically the way mothers do. Fix it. Guide him. Comfort him. But then I stopped myself, because that instinct right there, that endless reflex to emotionally rescue grown men, had nearly destroyed my self-respect. So instead I told the truth. I don't know. Ryan looked stunned by the answer. You always know what to do. No, I said quietly. I just always tried. That hit him hard. He looked down at Harold's watch still sitting in his hands. I don't deserve any part of Dad tonight. No, I repeated softly. You don't. Another long silence passed between us. Cars moved slowly through snowy downtown streets nearby. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang faintly through the cold night air. Finally, I reached into my purse and removed my house keys. Ryan looked confused. Then I handed him a single folded document. He opened it slowly. His face drained of color immediately. Mom? It's a formal occupancy notice. He stared at me in shock. You're kicking us out. I'm reclaiming boundaries. The distinction mattered. Very much. You and Vanessa may remain in the townhouse temporarily under formal rental terms while legal adjustments are made. Ryan looked devastated. You'd really do that? I met his eyes calmly. You really sat there while your wife threw wine in my face. The truth of it landed heavily again. He lowered his head immediately. I deserve that. Yes, I said softly. You do. But even then I wasn't cruel about it, because cruelty had already poisoned enough of this family. I continued gently. I spent too many years confusing love with unlimited access, Ryan. That ends tonight. Tears rolled down his face again. I almost reached for him. Almost. But I stopped myself, because healing sometimes requires distance before reconciliation. Mia quietly stepped outside, holding a clean scarf. Mrs. Cox, she asked timidly. You forgot this? I smiled warmly at her. Thank you. She hesitated awkwardly before speaking. My mom used to say something she whispered. People who survive hard lives sometimes forget they're allowed to protect themselves too. I stared at her for a second, then unexpectedly laughed through tears. Because somehow wisdom kept finding me tonight through strangers instead of family. I wrapped the scarf around my shoulders slowly. Then I looked one final time at Ryan standing beneath the restaurant lights, holding Harold's watch like a man finally understanding the weight of inheritance. Not money, not property, character, and maybe for the first time in years, he realized how badly he had failed to carry it. The internet destroyed Vanessa within 48 hours. I wish I could say I felt triumphant watching it happen, but honestly, I mostly felt tired. Someone at Bella Vita had uploaded clips from the birthday dinner online before midnight. First anonymously, then everywhere. Vanessa standing over me with the wine glass. Vanessa calling me cheap. Ryan sitting frozen in silence. The video spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, thousands of strangers were debating our family online. Some people defended me fiercely, others criticized Ryan. A few tried defending Vanessa by claiming the clips lacked context. But then the audio recording surfaced. And after that, there was no saving her reputation. Vanessa built her entire life around public image. That's the danger of building identity on appearances instead of character. Once appearances crack, there's nothing underneath strong enough to survive impact. Brand partnerships disappeared almost immediately. Comments flooded her social media pages. Cruel comments, mocking comments, angry comments. Ironically, the same internet culture Vanessa once used to humiliate others had now turned against her. She posted a crying apology video 3 days later. I never watched it. Benjamin did. She spends most of it blaming stress, he told me dryly over coffee. That sounded about right. Ryan moved into the townhouse guest room shortly after the dinner, not because I demanded it, because Vanessa refused to sleep in the same room after he publicly sided against her. The marriage deteriorated quickly after that. People who bond through superiority rarely survive shame together, according to Benjamin. Vanessa became furious about the occupancy notice and threatened legal action several times. But the trust structure was airtight. Years ago, Harold used to joke that Benjamin prepared legal documents like he expected organized crime families to challenge them. Thank God for that. The first week after the dinner, Ryan called me 14 times. I answered none of them. Not to punish him, to breathe. That distinction mattered deeply to me. For the first time in my adult life, I was learning something revolutionary. Loving someone does not require immediate access to you, especially after they wound you. The silence between us hurt terribly. Every morning, I still instinctively reached for my phone expecting his old Sunday calls. Grief doesn't disappear just because anger arrives. Sometimes they sit together quietly inside your chest. One rainy afternoon about 3 weeks later, I was reorganizing kitchen cabinets when Denise came over unexpectedly. She watched me silently for a few minutes before speaking. You're cleaning aggressively. I laughed softly. I might be. She leaned against the counter. How's Ryan? I froze briefly. Interesting how mothers still answer that question before anyone asks how they themselves are doing. I don't know, I admitted quietly. Denise studied me carefully. You miss him. Tears burned instantly behind my eyes. Yes, because despite everything, I still loved my son. That's the terrible beauty of motherhood. Love doesn't evaporate when disappointment arrives. Sometimes it deepens painfully instead. A few days later, Benjamin called again. Ryan requested a meeting. My chest tightened immediately. With me? Yes. I stayed silent. He didn't ask about money, Benjamin added carefully. That surprised me. He asked if there was any way to repair the relationship. I sat slowly at my kitchen table. Outside, snow melted quietly from tree branches beneath gray February skies. What did you tell him? Benjamin paused. I told him remorse and repair are not the same thing. That sentence stayed with me long after we hung up. Because it was true. Feeling guilty doesn't automatically rebuild trust, especially trust shattered publicly. Another week passed before Ryan finally came to see me. Not at church, not during some emotional family holiday. Just a random Tuesday afternoon, I opened the front door and barely recognized him. He looked exhausted. Not physically, spiritually. His expensive coats were gone, replaced by a simple dark sweater. His eyes looked older somehow. Human suffering humbles vanity quickly. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. I stepped aside silently and let him enter. The house felt awkward around him now, like we were strangers pretending to remember familiarity. Ryan looked around slowly at the living room. The old records, Harold's photos, the knitted blankets. I used to think this house felt small, he admitted softly. I said nothing. Now it feels peaceful. That nearly broke me, because he finally understood the difference between luxury and safety. We sat at the kitchen table for several long minutes before either of us spoke again. Finally, Ryan pulled something from his pocket carefully. Harold's watch. I couldn't keep it, he whispered. I looked down at the silver watch quietly. You should. He shook his head immediately. No. Tears filled his eyes again. Every time I look at it, I hear Dad asking me what kind of man lets someone humiliate his mother. The raw honesty hurt. But strangely, it also healed something small. Because for the first time, Ryan wasn't minimizing what happened. He wasn't explaining it away. He was facing it fully. I started therapy, he said quietly. I looked up in surprise. Ryan gave a weak smile. Turns out avoiding conflict your entire life eventually destroys people. That sounded painfully true. He rubbed his hands together nervously. I blamed you for needing emotional connection because I didn't know how to handle emotional responsibility. I listened silently. And Vanessa... He swallowed hard. She made it easier to see love as pressure instead of privilege. Tears slipped slowly down my face. Not because everything was fixed, because truth finally sounded honest between us again. Ryan stared at the table. You know what the worst part is? What? I became embarrassed by the very qualities that made you extraordinary. The kitchen went quiet. Then he whispered something so softly I almost missed it. You love people without needing applause. That sentence came from somewhere deep. Somewhere real. And suddenly I realized something important. Ryan wasn't asking for money anymore. Or housing, or control. He was asking for moral direction. Like a lost little boy again. But this time I couldn't rescue him by sacrificing myself. He had to become better willingly. I don't know if I can trust you yet, I admitted honestly. Ryan nodded immediately. You shouldn't. That answer mattered more than he realized, because accountability sounds very different from self-pity. He reached slowly into his coat pocket again. This time he handed me divorce papers. My breath caught. It's over, he said quietly. I stared at him. Are you sure? Ryan looked toward Harold's photograph hanging near the hallway. No marriage survives once you realize the person beside you enjoys humiliating vulnerable people. The sadness in his voice felt genuine. Not dramatic, just deeply tired. He stood slowly after a while. I don't expect forgiveness quickly, he said softly. I just wanted you to know I finally understand what I became. Then he hesitated near the doorway. Dad would have protected you. I swallowed hard. Yes, I whispered. Ryan nodded painfully. I should have too. After he left, I stood alone by the window watching snow fall softly across the yard. And for the first time since that horrible birthday dinner, I allowed myself to believe something unexpected. Not that everything would return to normal. It wouldn't. Some things break permanently, but maybe just maybe. My son had finally started becoming a man again. 1 year later, I celebrated my 68th birthday in my backyard. No chandeliers, no luxury restaurant, no audience, just folding tables beneath soft string lights, fresh flowers from my garden, and people who actually loved me. And honestly, it was the most beautiful birthday of my life. Spring had finally returned to Columbus after a long winter. My hydrangeas were blooming again. Pale blue and full against the fence Harold built years ago. Sometimes healing looks exactly like that. Quiet, slow, alive again anyway. I stood near the patio arranging slices of peach pie when Mia walked through the gate carrying a bouquet of sunflowers. Birthday girl, she called brightly. I laughed immediately. Over the past year, Mia had become unexpectedly important in my life. What started as one act of kindness outside Bella Vita slowly turned into weekly coffee visits, holiday dinners, and genuine friendship. She graduated nursing school 3 months earlier. I cried harder at her graduation than I expected. You know, she once told me you changed my life before we even met. Funny thing is, she changed mine too. Because Mia reminded me that motherhood and nurturing don't end simply because one relationship breaks your heart. Love still has places to go. Denise arrived shortly after carrying homemade pasta salad while loudly criticizing my decision to do any cooking on my own birthday. Benjamin came too grumbling about parking while secretly carrying my favorite bakery cake. And then, about 20 minutes before dinner started, Ryan walked through the side gate quietly. The entire yard fell still for one brief second. Not tense exactly, just careful. Ryan looked different than he had a year ago, simpler, calmer. The expensive arrogance was gone now. No designer watches. No polished performance. Just a plain button-down shirt and tired, honest eyes. He held a small wrapped package nervously in both hands. "Hi, Mom." I studied him silently for a moment, then nodded gently. "Hi, Ryan." He looked around awkwardly. "This is beautiful." "It's peaceful," I corrected softly. A faint, sad smile crossed his face. "Yeah," he whispered. "It is." Over the past year, Ryan and I had rebuilt something fragile. Not complete trust. Not the old relationship. That version was gone forever. But something more honest had slowly begun growing in its place. He stayed in therapy. He volunteered occasionally now through one of the housing charities funded by my trust. And perhaps most importantly, he stopped asking for emotional shortcuts. No more. Can't we move past this? No more. You know I didn't mean it. No more. That's just how Vanessa was, instead. Ryan learned the difficult truth most adults avoid. Intentions matter less than impact, especially when someone trusted you to protect them. The divorce finalized 6 months after Bella Vita. I rarely asked questions about Vanessa afterward. Not because I hated her. Oddly enough, I didn't anymore. Hatred requires emotional attachment, and eventually I realized Vanessa was simply a deeply empty person trying to build worth through superiority. People like that destroy others because they cannot tolerate their own reflection. I genuinely hoped she found help someday. But I no longer wanted proximity to her pain. That boundary changed my life. Actually, boundaries changed everything. For the first time since Harold died, I began living for myself instead of constantly positioning my life around someone else's needs. I traveled with Denise to Charleston for a week. I joined a watercolor class, despite being terrible at painting. I started hosting monthly dinners for widows in the community. And quietly, without publicity, I expanded the scholarship program into a larger foundation, supporting older women facing emotional abuse or financial manipulation within families. Because after Bella Vita, I discovered something heartbreaking. There were far more women like me than I ever realized. Women dismissed because of age. Women treated like burdens after years of sacrifice. Women manipulated through guilt, loneliness, or fear of abandonment. One woman cried in my kitchen 3 months earlier while whispering, "I thought I was the only one." That sentence stayed with me. No woman should feel alone in her suffering simply because society teaches older women to disappear quietly. Ryan approached me carefully while everyone settled around the tables. "I brought you something." He handed me the wrapped box nervously. Inside was a framed photograph. Not expensive, not elaborate. Just a simple picture of me and Harold dancing in our kitchen 30 years ago while little Ryan laughed in the background. I stared at it silently. "I found it in storage," Ryan said softly. Tears burned my eyes immediately. "It's beautiful." He swallowed hard. I spent years chasing appearances and somehow forgot what love actually looked like. The honesty still hurt sometimes. But now it also healed. Because growth sounds different than guilt. Growth carries humility. Ryan looked toward Harold's old grill near the patio. "I used to think success meant becoming impressive," he admitted quietly. "And now," he smiled sadly, "now I think success means becoming safe for the people who love you." That nearly made me cry again, because that lesson cost us both dearly. Dinner began as the sun slowly lowered behind the trees. People laughed, music played softly. Mia teased Benjamin about refusing to retire. Denise insisted my peach pie remained religious level good, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel emotionally responsible for holding everyone together. Peace existed naturally, without performance, without fear, without humiliation. At one point during dinner, Ryan looked at me carefully across the table. "Do you forgive me?" The entire yard became quiet, not awkward, just honest. I thought about the wine, the silence, the betrayal, the months of grief afterward. Then I thought about therapy appointments, tears, accountability, effort, change. Finally, I answered truthfully, yes. Ryan's eyes filled instantly, but before relief could fully settle across his face, I continued gently. "Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." He nodded immediately. "I know. And it doesn't restore automatic trust. I know that too." I smiled faintly. "But it means I'm no longer carrying bitterness." That mattered. Because bitterness would have allowed Bella Vita to destroy more than one birthday. It would have stolen the rest of my life too. Later that evening, after everyone finished dessert, Ryan helped me clean dishes in the kitchen. At one point, he paused quietly beside the sink. "You know what I finally understand." What he looked at me with tears shining softly in his eyes. "You weren't weak for loving people deeply. I placed a plate carefully into warm dishwater. No, I whispered. But I was wrong for believing love required tolerating disrespect. Ryan nodded slowly. That lesson changed both of us. As the evening ended, guests hugged goodbye beneath glowing backyard lights, while spring air drifted softly through the trees. I stood alone for a moment on the patio afterward, holding Harold's photograph against my chest, and suddenly I realized something beautiful. The worst night of my life had not destroyed me. It revealed me, not as cheap, not as weak, but as a woman who survived humiliation without surrendering dignity. A woman who finally learned that growing older does not reduce your worth. And a woman who understood at last that love without respect is not love at all. After everything that happened, I spent a long time asking myself one painful question: how do people who love each other end up hurting each other so deeply? And the truth I discovered is this: cruelty rarely begins with one terrible moment. It begins with small silences, small excuses, small moments where respect disappears and nobody corrects it. That birthday dinner was not the beginning of my pain. It was simply the moment the truth became impossible to ignore. For years, I confused sacrifice with love. I believed that if I gave enough, forgave enough, stayed patient enough, people would eventually treat me gently in return. But life taught me something different. Love should never require you to abandon your dignity. Not for a spouse, not for children, not for family, especially not as you grow older. Aging is not something shameful. Needing connection is not weakness. Living simply does not make a person cheap. In fact, some of the richest people I've ever met owned very little but gave kindness freely. And some of the poorest souls hid behind luxury status and appearances while starving for compassion inside. If my story means anything, I hope it reminds you of this: you are never too old to set boundaries. You are never too old to demand respect. And you are never too old to rebuild your life after heartbreak. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can say is no more. Not with anger. Not with revenge, but with dignity. And strangely enough, that's often where healing finally begins. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and protecting your self-respect? And where are you watching from today? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this. Your support allows stories like mine to reach people who may need them most.